4 decades after they parted ways, the Beatles still hold the top spot on every conceivable list of the greatest recording artists of all time. Not only do they beat all comers in the realms of critical and commercial success, no other pop act before or since has even come close to matching the Fab Four in terms of innovation and social impact. With pop music still in its infancy back in the early 60s, the lads from Liverpool broke so much musical, lyrical, stylistic and cultural ground that by the time they split in 1970, they'd left little new territory for successive generations of musicians to explore. As well as through their own catalogue of recordings, which continue to attract new fans every year, the Beatles have lived on through the legacy of their unmistakable influence on music ever since. There could be no doubt, however, that in creating such a hard act to follow, John, Paul, George and Ringo were also making a rod for their own backs, condemning themselves to a lifetime of comparison to their days as a Beatle. Whatever they chose to turn their hand to, their subsequent achievements would forever be judged against the unmatchable benchmark they'd set as a group. This is the story of what happened next. Often referred to as the first Beatle, John Lennon, along with his wife Yoko Ono, has often been blamed for the breakup of the supergroup. The story goes that after meeting Yoko at one of her exhibitions in 1966, John became more and more infatuated with the Japanese-American conceptual artist. They began an affair in 1968, bringing about John's divorce from his first wife, Cynthia. From then on, he and Yoko were joined at the hip. Not only did they record their own avant-garde music together, John also insisted that Yoko be allowed artistic input into the Beatles recordings, widening the cracks that had already begun to appear within the band. In 1969, John and Yoko formed the Plastic Ono Band. The rapturous reception they received at that year's Toronto Rock and Roll Revival consolidated John's decision to leave the Beatles. Despite subsequent renegotiations of a new contract, it was all over bar the shouting, and John was already well on his way to a successful solo career. Double Fantasy showed his softer, more mature side and was packed with odes to his family. In interviews to promote the album, John declared he was happier now than at any other point in his life, and he wrote a song called Life Begins at 40 to prove it. Tragically for John Lennon, life was also destined to end at 40. Just 3 weeks after the release of Double Fantasy, he was gunned down on the way into his apartment building. On December the 8th at 10:50 p.m, he was following Yoko into the Dakota when 25-year-old Mark Chapman stepped out of the shadows and fired 5 shots. 4 found their mark, and at 11:21, John Lennon was pronounced dead on arrival at the Roosevelt Hospital.